In the quiet town of Ardmore, Oklahoma, the year 2005 brought with it a shocking revelation that would alter the lives of the residents forever. For 15 long years, the disappearance of 16-year-old Claire Donovan had haunted her family and the local community. Claire, a bright and ambitious high school junior with an infectious smile, had vanished on a warm spring evening in 1990, while walking home from her part-time job at a local bookstore. Her family had spent years grappling with the uncertainty of her fate, a psychological torment that is well documented among families of long-missing persons. The absence of closure left them in a perpetual state of anticipatory grief, a condition where hope and despair collide, often causing anxiety, depression, and strained interpersonal relationships. Every holiday, birthday, and milestone reminded them of the void left by Claire's disappearance. And her parents, Margaret and Stephen Donovan, became advocates for missing children, hoping their efforts could prevent other families from enduring the same suffering. Initially, law enforcement had followed all standard procedures. Interviews were conducted with friends, neighbors, and possible acquaintances, but the lack of physical evidence stymied progress. Witness statements were inconsistent, and small-town dynamics complicated matters, as fear and suspicion spread through the community. Psychologists note that in tightly knit communities, the fear of reprisal or disrupting social harmony often inhibits witnesses from coming forward, prolonging cases and heightening tension. Despite the lack of leads, the local police never closed the file, keeping Claire's disappearance active in hopes that a breakthrough might one day occur. Over time, forensic science evolved, and investigators began revisiting cold cases nationwide, including Claire's by 2005. Advances in DNA technology and criminal databases provided the first glimmers of hope for the Donovan family. Investigators, led by Detective Samuel Pierce, re-examined old evidence, including items collected from the area where Claire had been last seen. This included clothing, personal effects, and minute biological samples that had previously yielded no results. The process required painstaking attention to detail, as forensic teams meticulously analyzed fibers, blood traces, and hair samples. Experts in criminal psychology emphasize that patience and methodical attention to minutiae are often what eventually crack long-standing cold cases, particularly when the suspect has skillfully concealed their crimes. In parallel, detectives scrutinized historical behavioral patterns, interviewing individuals who had interacted with Claire in the months leading up to her disappearance. One former friend recalled that Claire had been unusually cautious, frequently changing her walking routes home and speaking cryptically about feeling watched. Though dismissed at the time as typical teenage paranoia, behavioral psychologists note that premonitory anxiety in adolescence can sometimes be grounded in real, yet unrecognized threats. Investigators also revisited known offenders in the region, looking for connections that had been previously overlooked, tracing past convictions, movements, and interpersonal relationships revealed patterns that had been invisible in the 1990s, but became discernible through contemporary analytical techniques. The breakthrough came when forensic technicians revisited a small collection of fibers found on Claire's backpack. Modern DNA amplification techniques allowed for testing of degraded samples, ultimately yielding a partial genetic profile. This partial match, when cross-referenced with national databases, pointed toward a man named Gregory Walters, a 39-year-old resident of Ardmore with a minor criminal record and a history of disturbing behavior toward young women. Psychologists specializing in criminal profiling highlight that offenders who commit premeditated abductions often maintain patterns of behavior, repeating subtle acts over time that, when combined with modern investigative tools, can create a clear evidentiary trail. Detectives approach the investigation with cautious optimism, understanding that even with a potential suspect, corroborating evidence was essential. Interviews were conducted with former acquaintances, and alibis were rechecked with precise scrutiny. Walters, by all appearances, had maintained a quiet, unremarkable life in the intervening years, blending seamlessly into the community. However, behavioral experts explain that many offenders develop a facade of normalcy, a phenomenon known as masking, which allows them to evade detection while continuing underlying compulsions or secretive behaviors. The juxtaposition of a seemingly ordinary life and a dark hidden past often challenges communities' understanding of trust and safety. Meanwhile, the Donovan family was both anxious and hopeful. Margaret and Stephen lived with the dual burden of fearing another dead end while longing for confirmation of Claire's fate. Human psychology indicates that prolonged uncertainty often intensifies family bonds, as shared grief and vigilance create a tightly knit emotional unit, but it also risks emotional exhaustion. Margaret describes sleepless nights, recurring dreams, and moments of intense anxiety when reviewing old photographs of Claire. She recalled watching for signs any sudden letter, phone call, or rumor that could provide insight. The human brain, especially under chronic stress, often scans for patterns or signals, sometimes creating imagined connections, but in the case of Claire Donovan, the meticulous investigation was beginning to intersect with reality in unexpected ways. Detectives began constructing a detailed timeline of Gregory Walters' activities during the spring of 1990, bank records, employment logs, and neighborhood observations were synthesized to narrow windows of opportunity for the crime. Forensic psychologists note that creating an accurate chronology is vital, not only for establishing the suspect's presence, but also for understanding the psychological state and decision-making process that may have influenced the offense. Each piece of evidence, no matter how minute, was catalogued and assessed in the broader context of behavior, motive, and opportunity. Walter's interrogation was scheduled after sufficient evidence had been gathered. Law enforcement employed a strategic approach informed by behavioral analysis, understanding that the suspect's reactions could reveal as much as his statements. Investigators allowed him to speak while carefully observing non-verbal cues, microexpressions, tone shifts, and body language. Criminal psychologists assert that these subtle signals often betray internal conflict, deception, or suppressed memories, offering crucial insight during interrogations. Walters initially denied any involvement, maintaining an outwardly calm demeanor, but the careful presentation of DNA evidence, corroborating witness accounts, and behavioral inconsistencies gradually destabilized his facade. The pivotal moment occurred when Walters made a surprising admission, confessing to involvement in Claire's disappearance, though initially minimizing the circumstances. Investigators pressed for full details, understanding that partial confessions could later be challenged or misinterpreted. Human behavior studies show that some offenders confess after being confronted with incontrovertible evidence, often expressing a mix of relief, fear, and rationalization. Walter's narrative eventually aligned with physical evidence and behavioral predictions, revealing both premeditated and opportunistic elements of the crime. For the Donovan family, the confession was a mixture of relief and renewed sorrow. Psychologists explain that long-awaited confessions can trigger complex emotional responses, combining validation with the reawakening of trauma. The knowledge that Claire's abductor had been identified offered closure, but also forced the family to relive the pain of loss and the vivid imagination of the events themselves. Margaret described the moment as surreal, a mixture of grief, disbelief, and cautious hope that justice would finally be served. Community reaction in Ardmore was equally intense. Residents who had lived with a sense of unresolved fear now grappled with a mix of outrage, relief, and reflection. The identification of Walters prompted discussions about trust, vigilance, and the hidden dangers that can lurk in seemingly safe neighborhoods. Experts in collective psychology note that communities experiencing prolonged exposure to unresolved crimes often exhibit heightened collective vigilance, social cohesion, and a re-evaluation of norms regarding safety and communication. Local schools and civic groups responded by organizing awareness sessions, child safety programs, and forums for parents to discuss strategies for safeguarding children while maintaining social trust. As the investigation concluded, prosecutors prepared a comprehensive case for trial. The combination of forensic evidence, confession, witness corroboration, and behavioral analyses formed a compelling narrative that emphasized not only the crime but also its emotional and psychological impact. Criminal psychologists emphasize that presenting cases in a human-centered manner, where the victim's experience is increases the clarity and emotional resonance for jurors, fostering a balanced understanding of both technical facts and their human consequences. The arrest of Gregory Walters marked the end of a long chapter of uncertainty for Claire's family and the town of Ardmore, while the road to the courtroom was only beginning. The careful application of modern forensic techniques, behavioral insights, and meticulous investigation offered a promise of justice long deferred. For the Donovan family, each step forward was a testament to patience, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. The story of Claire Donovan, though tragic, became a case study in the intersection of human psychology, forensic science, and communal healing, demonstrating that even decades-old mysteries could be resolved through diligence, insight, and compassion. The days following Gregory Walters' arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and meticulous preparation. Detectives knew that while the confession was significant, the real test would come in court, where every detail needed to withstand scrutiny. Walters' arrest rekindled memories for the Donovan family, as each recollection of Claire's final days returned with vivid clarity. Psychologists note that revisiting traumatic events, even after years, often triggers a mix of grief, anxiety, and sometimes post-traumatic growth, a phenomenon where individuals develop resilience, empathy, and deeper insights into life following adversity. Margaret Donovan, who had spent countless nights in despair and quiet hope, now found herself wrestling with an intricate blend of relief and sorrow. She realized that while the identity of the perpetrator brought validation, it also forced her to confront the rawness of Claire's final moments in ways she had suppressed for 15 years. Detective Pierce and his team revisited the timeline of events with renewed intensity. They examined minor inconsistencies in prior witness statements, reconciling them with the new confession. Behavioral experts stress that even small discrepancies can reveal critical patterns, indicating psychological states of both witnesses and perpetrators. In this case, certain neighbors recalled seeing a dark vehicle parked near the bookstore around the time Claire disappeared. Initially, these memories were dismissed as coincidence, but when correlated with the confession and known movements of Walters, a clearer pattern emerged. This careful cross-referencing of anecdotal accounts with forensic data is essential in cold case investigations, especially when the evidence must bridge decades of elapsed time. Forensic analysis continued in parallel. Investigators re-examined the fibers and DNA collected from Claire's belongings and compared them with items found in Walter's residence. They discovered additional traces that corroborated his confession, small but irrefutable evidence linking him to the crime scene. This discovery was both scientifically and psychologically significant. Criminal psychologists note that tangible evidence, especially when combined with behavioral admissions, provides jurors and the community with an objective foundation for understanding the truth, reducing ambiguity that often fosters denial or community mistrust. Walter's careful manipulation of his environment had initially allowed him to evade capture, but the precision of modern DNA techniques ultimately dismantled the protective illusion he had built over the years. The legal team focused on understanding Walter's psychological profile to anticipate defense strategies. Behavioral experts predicted that he might attempt to minimize culpability, shift blame, or introduce mental health claims to mitigate sentencing. Historical research indicates that offenders who have maintained long-term facades often rely on calculated presentations of innocence to manipulate perception. Preparing for these tactics, the prosecution crafted a narrative that was both factually airtight and psychologically informed, emphasizing the chronological progression of the crime, the deliberate actions of the suspect, and the long-term emotional consequences on the victim's family. Community dynamics in Ardmore shifted as news of the arrest spread. Many residents had lived with unspoken fear for 15 years, and the revelation that someone they had seen or interacted with casually could harbor such darkness caused widespread reflection. Human behavior studies suggest that such revelations in close-knit communities generate heightened vigilance and re-evaluation of trust networks. Parents became more proactive in safeguarding their children. Schools reviewed security policies, and civic groups encouraged open dialogue about safety and early warning signs. The Donovan family's involvement in public awareness initiatives became both therapeutic and instructive, helping others understand the psychological complexity of long-term missing person cases. During pre-trial preparations, investigators worked to recover the final missing pieces of the puzzle. Walters was asked to reveal precise locations related to the crime, including where he had held Claire temporarily and what methods he used to avoid detection. These disclosures, while harrowing, were vital to achieving closure for the Donovan family. Psychologists studying trauma note that knowing the details of a loved one's experience, though painful, often helps survivors integrate the event into a coherent narrative, reducing ongoing uncertainty and guilt. Each location and act Walters described was carefully verified against existing evidence, ensuring the integrity of the case and minimizing any chance for reasonable doubt. The interrogation process revealed another layer of complexity. Walter's motivations and psychological state at the time of the crime. He confessed to a mixture of opportunism and obsession, describing a distorted perception of control that often characterizes abductors of adolescents. Experts explain that such offenders frequently rationalize their actions, blending fantasy with justification, and over time, this rationalization reinforces the secrecy and manipulation required to evade detection. Understanding these cognitive processes was crucial for the prosecution, as it allowed them to present not only what Walters did, but why, making the case comprehensible to the jury and the community. Parallel to the legal and investigative work, The Donovan family navigated their own emotional journey. Margaret and Stephen worked with therapists to manage stress, grief, and the sudden resurgence of traumatic memories. Support groups for families of missing persons provided a forum for sharing experiences and strategies for coping. Psychologists emphasize the importance of such support networks, as chronic, unresolved trauma can lead to complex post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and social withdrawal. Engaging with the community and advocacy work helped the family channel their emotional energy into constructive action, turning personal anguish into public education and awareness. Media coverage of the case reflected a blend of human interest and forensic fascination. Reporters highlighted the remarkable role of modern DNA technology, behavioral profiling, and sheer persistence in solving a 15-year-old case. The narrative emphasized not only the crime, but also the human resilience and psychological intricacies that defined the investigation. Social psychologists note that media framing significantly shapes public perception of justice, often influencing community attitudes toward law enforcement, safety, and the importance of technological advancement in crime resolution. The Donovan family's measured engagement with the press helped maintain dignity and focus, preventing sensationalism from overshadowing the core human story. As the trial date approached, prosecutors assembled a compelling presentation. They meticulously detailed Claire's disappearance, the investigative dead ends of the 1990s, the breakthrough DNA matches, and Walter's eventual confession. Each component was designed to resonate both intellectually and emotionally, conveying the sequence of events with clarity while also highlighting the psychological consequences for all parties involved. Behavioral experts were called upon to testify about Walter's profile, explaining patterns of manipulation, obsession, and concealment that aligned with known offender behaviors. This approach provided the jury with a framework to understand not just the acts themselves, but the underlying psychological architecture that sustained Walter's deception over years. Simultaneously, the Donovan family prepared for courtroom appearances. Marginalized grief and prolonged anxiety required careful management to prevent emotional overwhelm during testimony. Psychologists recommended structured support and narrative rehearsal, which allows witnesses to present coherent and composed accounts while minimizing retreat. Margaret and Stephen practiced recounting events calmly, emphasizing facts while allowing room for genuine emotion. Their approach exemplified resilience, demonstrating that long-term trauma, while profound, can be navigated with structured support and psychological insights to the broader community. Discussions emerged about prevention, early warning signs, and the role of technology in crime resolution. Schools integrated safety programs, parents participated in workshops, and local authorities encouraged vigilance without fostering paranoia. Community psychologists emphasize that structured response and education transform fear into proactive measures, reducing anxiety while enhancing social cohesion. The case of Claire Donovan, once a symbol of unresolved tragedy, began to serve as a catalyst for communal awareness, preventive action, and the reinforcement of ethical responsibility. Detectives continued to analyze Walter's behavioral history, tracing earlier interactions that had gone unnoticed. They discovered a pattern of minor, troubling behaviors directed toward other young women in the community, incidents that had never escalated to charges, but, in retrospect, foreshadowed the eventual crime. Criminal psychologists highlight that early intervention and careful monitoring of such patterns are essential in preventing escalation, underscoring the importance of vigilance in both law enforcement and community awareness. Each discovery reinforced the complex interplay between opportunity, intent, and concealment, providing deeper understanding of how Walters had operated undetected for so long. As the trial opened, the courtroom atmosphere was tense but controlled. The prosecution's narrative wove together evidence, confession, and psychological insight, demonstrating a coherent and compelling account of events. Walters, now facing a lifetime of scrutiny, displayed subtle signs of stress and evasion, which forensic psychologists observed as consistent with prolonged internal conflict and the conventional surrender of control under pressure. The trial became more than a legal proceeding. It was a study in human behavior, resilience, and the power of persistent investigative work combined with scientific and psychological expertise. The courtroom remained hushed as the final pieces of evidence were introduced. Prosecutors meticulously presented the DNA matches, fibers, and corroborated timelines, connecting Walters directly to Claire Donovan's disappearance and murder. Each piece of evidence was accompanied by an explanation from forensic experts, ensuring that the jury understood not just the scientific findings, but also their significance in context. Behavioral psychologists were brought in to explain the mental processes behind such prolonged deceptive behavior, detailing how perpetrators like Walters manipulate perception, construct elaborate facades, and maintain secrecy over years. This combination of hard evidence and psychological insight created a compelling narrative, one that both intellectually and emotionally engaged everyone in the courtroom. Margaret Donovan, seated in the front row, felt a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. 15 years of unanswered questions and sleepless nights had led to this moment, yet the vivid recollection of Claire's final hours made the victory bittersweet. Psychologists note that surviving relatives often experience a dual process of grief and vindication. In such cases, validation of the truth can coexist with renewed mourning. Margaret clutched a small photo of Claire, tracing her daughter's face with her thumb, silently remembering her laughter, her curiosity, and the simple joys that had once filled their home. These small acts, while private, served as a grounding ritual, helping her maintain composure while navigating the intense emotional atmosphere of the trial. The defense, attempting to counter the evidence, tried to introduce alternative narratives, including claims of memory distortions and the possibility of accidental contamination of evidence. However, the prosecution anticipated these moves, presenting a meticulous chain of custody record for every piece of forensic material. Experts explained the reliability of modern DNA analysis, emphasizing how even decades-old samples can yield accurate and reproducible results. The jury, already primed by the combination of confession, behavioral profiling, and scientific evidence, found it increasingly difficult to consider the defense's arguments plausible. The precision of the prosecution's work left little room for doubt, reinforcing the inevitability of justice after years of uncertainty outside the courtroom. The community of Ardmore responded with cautious optimism. Parents discussed enhanced safety measures, schools reviewed supervision policies, and civic organizations held forums about early warning signs and crime prevention strategies. Social psychologists highlight that communities affected by long-term unresolved crimes often experience a period of heightened vigilance, followed by constructive adaptation. Citizens, initially driven by fear and uncertainty, begin to develop shared strategies that reduce vulnerability and foster social cohesion. The Donovan family participated in several of these initiatives, channeling their trauma into advocacy and public education. ensuring that Claire's story would not only serve justice but also empower others. Within the courtroom, Walter's demeanor revealed subtle cracks in his composure. His attempts to feign detachment were undermined by micro-expressions and body language consistent with stress, anxiety, and recognition of the overwhelming evidence arrayed against him. Forensic psychologists explain that nonverbal cues often reveal more than words in high-stakes situations, offering jurors critical insight into the credibility and emotional state of defendants. Walter's confession, previously delivered in a controlled interrogation setting, now resonated with an authenticity, heightened by his visible struggle to maintain a facade under the relentless scrutiny of court. Proceedings witnesses were called to recount their experiences. From the time of Claire's disappearance, neighbors, friends, and law enforcement personnel described their recollections, often pausing as emotions resurfaced. Margaret Donovan's testimony was particularly poignant. She spoke with clarity about her daughter's personality, the anxiety of unanswered calls, and the years of quiet hope that never fully faded. Psychologists studying trauma note that such testimonies often serve dual purposes. They inform the jury while also allowing survivors to process and integrate long-suppressed grief. Margaret's composure, combined with genuine emotion, made her account both credible and deeply affecting, emphasizing the human cost of prolonged unresolved crime. As evidence of Walter's previous minor offenses was presented, the jury gained a deeper understanding of patterns that often precede more serious crimes. Behavioral experts explained the significance of seemingly trivial or unreported incidents, illustrating how they sometimes indicate underlying psychological tendencies. This contextualization helped the jury comprehend the broader scope of Walter's behavior and the calculated nature of his eventual crime. Recognizing these patterns is critical not just for the immediate case but also for informing preventative measures and community awareness strategies. The trial also explored the role of technological advances in solving cold cases. DNA analysis, genealogical research, and modern database cross-referencing were highlighted as pivotal factors in identifying Walters after 15 years. Forensic experts discussed the evolution of these techniques, explaining how previously inaccessible information became crucial in connecting him to the crime. This emphasis on technological progress underscored a key theme of the case: persistence, combined with innovation, can ultimately triumph over time, deception, and the challenges of aging evidence. The jury was able to appreciate not only the skill of the investigators, but also the remarkable advancements that made this long-awaited resolution possible. As closing arguments began, the prosecution emphasized the deliberate and premeditated nature of Walter's actions. They recounted the meticulous planning, concealment strategies, and psychological manipulation involved in both the crime and his subsequent evasion of justice. Emphasis was placed on the enduring impact on the Donovan family, the community, and the broader societal imperative to hold perpetrators accountable regardless of the passage of time. Jurors were reminded of the combination of confession, forensic evidence, and behavioral analysis that left no reasonable doubt regarding Walter's culpability. Walter's defense attempted to humanize him, presenting personal hardships and suggesting the possibility of remorse, while acknowledging the complexity of human behavior. The prosecution countered with the undeniable facts: deliberate actions, sustained concealment, and long-term suffering inflicted on an innocent child and her family. Expert testimony highlighted the difference between superficial remorse and genuine accountability, illustrating that while human psychology is complex, The preponderance of evidence demonstrated conscious choice and responsibility on Walter's part. When the jury retired for deliberation, tension gripped the courtroom. 15 years of investigation, community anxiety, and personal grief were distilled into a decision that would shape the lives of everyone involved. Outside, media representatives and community members awaited updates reflecting the wide-reaching impact of the case. Behavioral studies suggest that high-profile trials involving cold cases often generate collective emotional investment, as communities identify with both the victim and the pursuit of justice. The Donovan family, while exhausted, remained composed, reflecting on how far they had come and the significance of finally reaching this pivotal moment. After several hours, the jury returned. The foreperson's voice resonated clearly. Walters was found guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of restrained relief and solemn acknowledgement of the tragedy endured. Psychologists note that such verdicts provide both validation and a framework for emotional closure. For the Donovan family, the sense of justice being served was profound, yet tempered by the inescapable memories of Claire's absence. Community members responded with cautious optimism, understanding that while the legal process had concluded, the social and psychological work of recovery would continue. Sentencing reflected the gravity of Walter's actions and the enduring impact on his victim's family. Judges took into account the premeditated nature of the crime, the prolonged concealment, and the profound psychological harm inflicted. Behavioral experts often advise that structured sentencing and clear articulation of accountability serve not only punitive purposes, but also psychological functions for survivors and communities, reinforcing the perception of justice and societal protection. The sentence underscored a societal commitment. No matter how much time passes, accountability is inevitable when crimes of such magnitude are committed. In the aftermath, the Donovan family engaged in community outreach, sharing their experience and emphasizing both awareness and prevention. Schools initiated safety programs, community centers hosted workshops on early warning signs, and local authorities emphasized the importance of vigilance. Social psychologists highlight that post-trauma engagement often fosters resilience, helping survivors transform grief into purposeful action. By sharing their story, Margaret and Stephen Donovan not only honored Claire's memory but also contributed to the broader social fabric, enhancing safety and understanding within Ardmore and beyond. The case also influenced law enforcement protocols. Officers received additional training in cold case management, evidence preservation, and community communication. The successful integration of psychological profiling, forensic science, and persistent investigative strategy became a model for other departments handling long-term unsolved cases. Researchers studying criminal behavior emphasized how persistence, coupled with modern technology and psychological insight, can overcome years of evasion and uncertainty. The narrative of Walter's capture became a case study in the value of multidisciplinary approaches to crime resolution. For Margaret and Stephen Donovan, daily life slowly regained rhythm, though forever altered by the experience. The memory of Claire remained a central part of their lives, guiding choices, relationships, and advocacy. Psychologists studying grief note that survivors often integrate trauma into their identity, finding meaning and purpose in its aftermath. In this sense, while the pain of loss remained, the resolution of the case offered a foundation for emotional recovery and the ability to honor their daughter's life constructively. Ultimately, The Oklahoma 2005 cold case exemplified the intersection of human perseverance, technological advancement, and psychological insight. The arrest, trial, and conviction of Gregory Walters demonstrated that even decades-old crimes could be solved through dedication, meticulous analysis, and understanding human behavior at its most complex. The Donovan family's journey reflected both personal resilience and the broader societal imperative to pursue justice relentlessly, ensuring that victims are remembered and perpetrators held accountable, no matter how much time has passed. Claire's story, though tragic, became a testament to persistence, the power of science and psychology, and the enduring capacity of human communities to seek and achieve justice.